Today on the Bible Reading Challenge podcast, we are going to give an overview of the Book of Proverbs. My name is Aaron Ventura, and I am joined today by Pastor Doug Wilson. Pastor Doug, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You are officially a regular now.
Yes,
I don't know how many episodes
that's
been.
right.
Yes.
I'm aspiring to be a sidekick.
Yes, you and Dr. Edwards. You might have to duke it out. We'll see who wins. All right, so today we're in a book that is, I find, to be one of the easiest to read, but maybe that's because I was raised in the generation of Twitter.
Yeah. That's very true. This is a book full of tweets.
Yes. So will you just situate this book in the canon of Scripture, because it is so different from really anything else we have?
Sure. It's the quintessential wisdom book. So it's part of the wisdom literature, like Ecclesiastes is and so forth. But like other conservative Bible students, I would locate it in the time of Solomon. Solomon having composed most of the Proverbs here, although there are a handful of other contributors, but he's the main one, which would situate it about in the 900s BC, 900 years before Christ. And as the wisdom literature, it's very much it fits in the genre of a certain strand of Jewish literature. Well, actually, ancient Near Eastern literature. There's quite a bit of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
You see it in Ecclesiasticus, for example, in the Apocrypha. You see it elsewhere.
So, would you consider Solomon as gathering wisdom from other places? How much of it is just God downloaded it to him because he didn't ask for riches and power, and he asked for wisdom, and so God gave it to him?
Yeah. Proverbial wisdom is really interesting because it really is a group project. It's a crowdsourced sort of thing.
Yeah.
At the same time, people like Solomon would have to be their own, heavily contributing themselves. So they're taking certain themes or certain observations or certain truisms, and they know how to put it in a really pithy way.
Yeah.
Right. So George Herbert, for example, the famous English poet, had a book called Outlandish Proverbs. He collected proverbs. And you say, bird in the hand is sort of, okay. So he collected them, but you get the sense that he also contributed.
Yeah.
Right. He put his own spin on it, and that's what I think we have here.
Yeah. It seems like a man who studies wisdom is going to need to get it from other places, and then himself starts to train his mind to think in different ways.
That's one of the things Proverbs itself would say.
Yeah.
The simple learn wisdom from being teachable.
Yeah. Let's talk about who this book is for. Okay. So there's this theme of it's being directed towards a son or a prince, and wisdom is meant for kings. So does that mean women don't get as much out of this as men do, or like what does that audience mean?
I think women would get as much out of it as men do. However, they would have to, in order to get the same blessing out of it, I think women have to take an extra step. They have to make the adjustment or the translation. So when Proverbs is warning the young man to stay away from strange women.
Yeah.
Okay. Generally, women don't need to be told to stay away from strange women, although it's a good thing still. Yeah. But they would have to take the extra step of translating of, okay, don't you be that strange woman. For example, young man, don't be tempted by women. Women, don't be the temptation. Yeah. But there's got to be a translation adjustment there.
Do you see any kind of narrative flow, or are there any real easy breaks in the book that you see that helps us kind of sort through, now we're shifting into this?
Yeah, I would say I would divide in terms of an obvious break. The first 9 chapters are basically a collection of wisdom poems, short wisdom poems. Yeah. And then chapter 10 on is what we normally think of when we think of the Book of Proverbs.
Yeah.
We think of a 2-line pithy aphorism
Yeah.
that is characterized by the Hebraic love of thought rhymes. So, parallelism. So
Yeah.
it's either and parallelism is funny because it can either be parallel or contrasting.
Yeah.
So the fool and the wise, or it could be the wise man does this and he also does this, and so it's an emphasis by parallel or emphasis by contrast. But chapters 10 and on are the thought rhyme classic standalone Proverbs. In one sense, it'd be the preacher's paradise because he doesn't have to mess with context.
Yeah. Totally.
Every verse, if he picks this verse as his text, he doesn't really have to spend a couple of days trying to figure out the flow of the argument because this is simply a collection of Proverbs.
Yeah. Talk about how you approached preaching Proverbs. So this isn't a book necessarily to just preach straight through. I think you took it topically, and what were those kind of general topical heads?
Okay, so if I were to, that's what I did. So I preached a sermon on work, for example, work/laziness, and then you go through Proverbs and you find a whole bunch of Proverbs on that subject, or you could preach a sermon on drunkenness or dissolute living, or a sermon on sex and sexual temptation. There'd be a bunch on that. You could preach a sermon on inheritance, and you'd have a number of things that you would find. So basically, if you want to preach topical sermons. And this is a parenthetical comment because I'm assuming that we've got some preachers listening to this, and there's a strong tradition in North American evangelicalism of expositional preaching, which I think is a good thing. I'm all for it.
Just like the apostles.
Well, that's the hitch. I'm a big fan of expositional preaching, but you don't have an example of it anywhere in the Bible.
Right.
So if you take the book of Hebrews as a sermon, which I think it quite possibly was originally, you've got verses brought in from all over. So the book of Romans would be a topical message. The book of Hebrews would be a topical message. So I'm a fan of expositional preaching, but not to the point where you superstitiously avoid addressing topics. Where if you preached a 3-week series on marriage, for example, there'd be plenty of Bible verses. You wouldn't pick one book of the Bible to do that with, unless it was to park in Proverbs, right? And you could talk about men and women. You could talk about sexual temptation. You could talk about work ethic together, why the book of Proverbs extols the 2-bucket woman,
Tell us, what is a proverb? Because a lot of people read through this book and they're like, that's not true, because what about this? And the book that follows this is Ecclesiastes, and then you have Job. And so some have even seen a trilogy of kind of wisdom developing in those three books. So what is a proverb? Let's start there.
So Proverbs, a proverb is not a geometric axiom. So for example, you have a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like an armed man. That's a proverb. Now, it's also true in real life that a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding the hands to rest, and sometimes a redneck wins the lottery. Right? And so that proverb's not true. So if you treat the proverb as though it were an axiom that said all triangles have 3 sides, well, there has never been an instance in the history of the universe where a triangle didn't have 3 sides. A triangle having 3 sides is axiomatically true across the board, everywhere, and at all times. It is not true axiomatically in the same way that a man who cheats on his wife is going to wreck his life. Right. Now, he's going to make things worse. But some men have been unfaithful and have had all the disasters of Proverbs rain down about them.
Yeah.
And it's generally true. Okay? But it's not universally true now, you might say, well, in the last judgment, God will even everything out and everything. Yeah, that part's true. But Proverbs is talking about this life, right? Sometimes lazy people don't wind up in poverty.
Yeah.
Now, enough of them do that parents should warn their sons that you should develop a phobia about laziness. You should be industrious, hard worker. So the lucky bounce of the ball generally goes to the person who's hustling.
Yeah.
Right. That's generally true, but not always.
Yeah.
So that's what a proverb is. A proverb says. So, for example, and there's one famous paired proverb: "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Do not answer a fool in his own folly, lest you become like him." Right. So we're given directly opposite advice, and we're expected to look at the context.
Yeah.
All right. And so, but we know what to do when that comes up in English proverbs, right? So many hands make light work. Lots of people helping helps out. That's a proverb. And too many cooks spoil the broth.
Yeah.
That's a proverb too. So too many people on the project means you're going to wreck it. Not having enough people on the project means you're going to wreck it. And so what's a person supposed to do?
I thought it's supposed to teach me wisdom.
That's right. And it just did.
Yeah.
It just said, okay, now you figure out what's your situation closest to.
Yeah.
Right? So when you're giving warnings to people, you're talking to the Book of Proverbs over the centuries has been talking to millions of people. And those millions of people are arranged in every possible combination of circumstance.
Yeah.
And you can't take a proverb and say this is a one-size-fits-all. But that's not how proverbs are designed to work.
Yeah. I think this is really hard, probably harder for conservatives who hold to, inerrancy and infallibility, and you spend your time reading these Pauline statements that are so absolute, or the words of Jesus that are so absolute. And then you get to a book like Proverbs, and you're wanting that kind of absoluteness that it's not trying to give. And so I think as a genre, we're just not even used to maybe reading the Bible this way, while at the same time, we use proverbial generalities all the time in common speech, but then our brain goes berserk when we get
because we don't realize how human the Bible is. So, and by human, I don't mean not inspired. It's God condescends to speak to us in the various genres and forms that we use.
Yeah.
So apocalyptic literature is different than historical literature, is different than poetry, is different than a proverb.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is learn the rules of the genre that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So if Paul says the just shall live by faith, well, okay, it's in a didactic book. We're being taught how to live. If you're a Christian, you take that to the bank. You're to trust in God. The just shall live by faith.
Yeah.
But if you come to the Book of Proverbs, it doesn't work the same way.
Yeah.
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Well, there's a promise there.
Yeah.
What are the boundaries and limits of that proverb, of that promise?
Yeah.
And it doesn't work the same way that other statements in other parts of Scripture would work.
Yeah. I think that distinction between promises from God and Proverbs saying this is the way life is a helpful distinction to make, where not every verse is Romans 8:28 kind of stuff. Sometimes it's just saying if you do this, generally this is what's gonna happen.
That's correct.
Let's talk about the fear of the Lord, because you're going to start this book and it's going to say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord over and over again. But what is that? If we're supposed to get it, that's the door to wisdom. A lot of people still wonder, how do I get that? What is that?
So the fear of the Lord is 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The thing that I would want to park on here is that the fear of the Lord is not our destination. It's not the the fear of the Lord would not be the shingles on the roof. The fear of the Lord would be the concrete foundation that you pour before you do anything else. So in order to have a God-fearing house, you have to fear the Lord at the beginning. And the fear of the Lord is an awareness, an awe-inspired awareness and astonishment of who He is, who God is. And it's not, so we, all Christians know that there's a kind of fear that's craven, and that 1 John 4, perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And in Hebrews 2, people who were held in bondage by the devil all their lives through the fear of death. So there's a kind of fear that's bad.
Yeah.
But the Bible commends fear and fearing God from beginning to end, from Genesis to Revelation. And it's a numinous fear. So Paul says in Philippians, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So there's a numinous sense of awe.
Yeah.
It's not casual, it's not breezy, you are sort of undone by your awareness of who God is. And Proverbs tells us that that's kindergarten.
Yeah.
That's the first set of ABCs that you have to learn if you want to learn anything else. It's got to start with the fear of God.
Yeah. So in our churches, so once upon a time you might walk into a cathedral and it gives you a sense of awe and wonder that God is here. I think it's R.C. Sproul talks about in The Holiness of God when he was converted to God the Father on this one night, and he experienced the majesty of God in contrast to this Jesus who seemed a lot more like him. So us in America, our worship services often don't have this sense of fear of God. In fact, our whole lives we can go through and it's full of trivialities.
Right.
So can you give some advice for us as Christians? How do we develop that more and more in our worship? And then say something about, for parents, if this is especially for children, how do you create a home in an atmosphere that has that joy, but also that fear of the Lord in it?
Yeah. The thing to recognize is that in Scripture, fear, this awestruck fear of God, is a good and gracious and kind thing. All sorts of blessings flow from it.
Yeah.
And Jesus himself feared. It says in Hebrews that his prayers were heard because he feared. So Jesus himself was a God-fearer. And that means that we are not descending into superstition when we fear God. So, for example, in Hebrews 12, at the very end of Hebrews 12, it says, Therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, and thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So the thing that I think many Christians have to begin with, before they can begin with the fear of God, they have to recognize that the fear of God is a good thing. So we have been trained to think that casual worship is good, come as you are is good, wear your pajamas if you want. We don't make any judgments, just come as you are. And well, we need to recognize that worshiping God with reverence and godly awe that's what we're summoned to. That's what we're called to do.
Yeah.
And the bulk of the Book of Proverbs, everything it teaches on sex and marriage and drunkenness and rotating your tires and changing your oil, it's that kind of practical book.
Yeah.
All of those things are going to be lost on you. Go right over your head if you're not a God-fearer.
Yeah. And can you talk about in the home what that looks like? Because it seems like you might grow up in a maybe austere home that everything is so serious, it's so thick, and it's almost oppressive.
Yeah.
Then you have homes where it's all jokes and you can't take anything seriously.
Yeah, that's a great thing. Lewis has the book that begins, there was a boy named Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Well, he called his parents by their first name.
Yeah.
You know, and Lewis is commenting how appalling that is, because that levels everything.
Yeah.
There's no sense of awe and respect. And so one of the things that parents must do is they must discipline their children in such a way as to instill in their children a godly awe and fear of them, the parents.
Yeah.
Another way of putting this, and this is going to sound wrong to a bunch of people, but the fact that it sounds wrong is part of our problem.
Mm-hmm.
You are to be your child's parent. You are not there to be their friend.
Mm-hmm.
That's wanting to put friendship first.
Yeah.
Is a wonderful way to wreck that whole enterprise. Now, of course, if your kids grow up fearing you and learning by that means as a set of training wheels to fear God.
Yeah.
As again, the author of Hebrews said, we all had earthly fathers and we looked up to them because they could whack us.
Yeah.
Well, we should make the necessary translation, and kids who grow up with a responsible awe of their dad, okay, and their mom, are going to be able to transition naturally to God.
Yeah.
If they have contempt for their parents, if their parents are abusive or ugly or whatever, then every time they come to pray to our Father who art in heaven, that word, our Father, is going to stick in their throat.
Yeah.
Or if they have this breezy egalitarian view, they're just going to walk in as though God's the old man upstairs, or he's their chum,
right.
And they're not going to worship God in reverence and godly fear. So I think a lot of piety begins in how parents discipline their children, how they instruct their children. They don't let their authority as parents be despised or undermined, but not because they are on a high horse, because like you mentioned, there are people where the house is not it's not full of authority in a biblical glad sense. It's just sad.
Yeah.
Everybody's sad, everybody's morose, everybody's we're serious Christians here and we never laughed at anything.
Yeah.
That's awful too.
Yeah, I think what I've noticed for a lot of people who read through, say, the Chronicles of Narnia, Lewis has a very good sense of hierarchy and a way of loving righteous hierarchy and being careful with even kind of unrighteous hierarchy, knowing the times to speak up and not. And the image of the lion is, he can eat you, but he's also good. Like, you should be scared of him because he can kill you, but he's also good. It seems like those kinds of stories and metaphors are really important in developing that kind of fear. In
Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Mr. Beaver said, well, so who said anything about safe?
Yeah.
But he's good.
Yeah.
All
right, so let's get into the meat of this book. And what I'm going to do is just run through a number of topics here, and then any proverbs that jump to mind, you can tell us what it says about it. So first, let's talk about listening to your parents. What does Proverbs say about listening to your parents?
It's basically, it says the fool doesn't. In Proverbs, there are three basic categories. There's the wise, there's the fool, and there's the simple. Okay, and the simple has some hope.
Yeah.
If you strike the fool, the simple learn wisdom. So there's this undecided group in the middle.
Yeah.
But the wise are characterized as the thing that's descriptive of them is that they listen. My son, pay attention to the law of your mother.
Yeah. Remember
the law of your mother. So I remember one time when our son was very, very little, and Nancy was starting to have challenges with him, and I had a talk with Nate. He was very little. I said, "Are you having trouble obeying your mom because she's a girl?" And yeah. And I said, "Well, I want you, every time you look at your mom, to see behind her my looming shadow. I'm with her.
Yeah.
All right. I'm with her, and we're double teaming. We're double teaming you. That was an example of me as the father in Proverbs saying, "Remember the law of your mother."
Yeah.
So dad backs mom up, and when dad backs mom up, and they're both reflecting the law of God, the message to the son is, listen, listen, heed, remember, don't forget.
Yeah. Yep. The famous Proverbs 31 begins that way with the mom saying, "Listen," or "What are you doing? What are you doing, my son?"
Yeah. Heed. So what it boils down to is heed. Another thing that's characteristic of Proverbs, and this might be an encouragement to parents who have told their son 85 times to clean his room.
Yeah.
Right. To make his bed in the morning. Well, one of the characteristics of Proverbs is repetition.
Yeah.
So it's not only heed, but the instruction to parents is repeat, repeat, repeat.
Yeah. What does Proverbs have to say about the kind of friends to have?
Yeah. It says, "Stay away, my son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not."
Yeah.
You shouldn't hang out with them. You shouldn't be with them. And if you discover after the fact that you wound up with them, you should head for the tall grass. You should hightail it out of there.
Yeah.
So the Proverbs has a great deal to say about bad companions.
Yep.
Yes.
What about the right kind of companions to have?
Yeah. Again, he walks with the wise will be wise.
Yeah.
Right. So yes.
I forget where it is, but it's like there's this distinction between a brother or a friend that's near better than a brother that's far away. Okay, this is a big one. What does Proverbs have to say about money?
Yeah. A righteous man lays up an inheritance for his children's children. So money is a good thing. Money is not inherently corrupted, but the human heart is.
Yeah.
So the teaching of Scripture on money, and it really comes out in high relief, I think, in Proverbs, is that money is hazardous. It's like a set of super sharp kitchen knives.
Yeah.
They're the best on the planet, and you can take your finger off.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to know how to handle them, and you don't let your 2-year-old play with them. You know, we should, or people who know guns know that if you have a gun in your home, as I do, every gun is a loaded gun.
Yeah.
Right. So, do I think guns are good? Yeah, I've got one. Do I think guns should be handled warily? Yes. The same thing is true of our money.
Yeah.
Right. So, money is. You have in Proverbs, there's a very strong sense of the goodness of the Deuteronomic promises.
Yeah.
So your oil will abound, your wine will abound, your garners will be full.
Yeah.
The lazy man comes to poverty, the industrious man comes into wealth. And that's generally true. Remember what we said about geometry. It's not triangles having 3 sides.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, if you have 1,000 men who work hard, up early, go to bed late, are industrious, they stay on task, out of those 1,000 men, 995 of them are going to do very well.
Yeah.
Right. And there will be the occasional exception, but they're going to do very well. And the people who sleep till noon, the men who sleep in harvest, shames their parents, as Proverbs says, and they come to nothing. And occasionally someone will get an inheritance, and he'll die a wastrel, spending a bunch of money like the prodigal son, like an unrepentant prodigal son. But that's the exception, not the rule. So basically, the world of Proverbs, when it comes to wealth and inheritance and work, is a very Deuteronomic book.
Yeah. I was going through and looking at what it has to say about kind of the paths to riches, and it sets forth kind of 2 paths. There is the way of plunder, of robbery, of usury, of oppressing the poor, and there's the get-rich schemes, and you think, how many get-rich schemes are people caught up in? And then the slow, the plodding, the diligence over time of wealth gained hastily. When God gives wisdom, he does it without sorrow. And so in some ways, Proverbs is like it's teaching a son, teaching someone how to get wealth the right kind of way. Can you talk a little bit in Proverbs 30? There's this prayer where it says, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, lest I'm poor and deny you, or I'm rich and I forget you." How does that fit in with what the rest of Scripture has to say about money?
Yeah. So one of in the verse you cite, I think this type of reasoning is present. It's starker with other passages, like Proverbs 15:17, where it says, but I think the same kind of thing is going on. In Proverbs 15:17, it says, "Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it." Yeah. And there are other passages like that in Proverbs as well. So if I'm given a choice between a thin soup, scanty dinner,
only veggies,
and it's veggies and water, thin soup, veggie water soup, and I'm sharing it with people that I love and who love me.
Yeah,
that's better than to have a sumptuous feast sitting around a table with people I detest.
Yeah.
Okay. So now this is a classic. You have the same thing. It's better to have a good reputation and no money than a bunch of money and a skunky reputation. It's the same deal. So because what you're being given is two variables. Here, a lousy dinner and a lot of love, and a great dinner and no love.
Yeah.
Well, those two variables actually give you four variables. So it would be possible under this setup to have a scanty meal and love, a scanty meal and no love, a sumptuous feast and love, a sumptuous feast and no love. Now the Bible tells me which one to prefer out of two of those.
Yeah.
Okay, I should prefer a thin meal and thick love to a thick meal and thin love.
Yeah.
That's so what that does, and this is how wisdom is learned, that teaches me to prioritize two of the four.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I can then place, according to wisdom, the other two handily.
Yeah.
If it's terrible to have a great dinner, a great Thanksgiving dinner, and the family's fighting the whole holiday, if that's bad, then what would it be like to have no turkey and no stuffing and no potatoes, and everybody's fighting the whole holiday?
Yeah.
Well, now you've got the worst of both worlds, right? Yeah. And then returning to the Deuteronomic thing, what would it be like to have a beautiful Thanksgiving feast and everybody loves each other? So I read a story one time where two guys were debating, and one of them, sort of taking the anti-Deuteronomic blessing approach, quoted the hymn that said, "I'd rather have Jesus than silver and gold." Yeah. Okay. To which his debating partner said, "I'd rather have Jesus and silver and gold." Okay. Well, that's the top of the four.
Yeah.
Okay. But the other guy was right to prefer Christ to silver and gold if that were the choice.
Yeah.
So, and this is a good example of how Proverbs works. So bring it back to the example that you said. Yeah. Don't give me too much, lest I forget God, and don't give me too little, lest I forget God.
Yeah.
Okay. So there, the author of the proverb is not really trusting himself. Out of those four options, okay, if he had the great dinner banquet in a great mansion, and everybody loving each other, he doesn't quite trust himself with that amount of wealth.
Yeah.
Right. So he asks for less than that. Don't give me too much, because the temptation, and you see this, I've been referring to Deuteronomic blessings. The temptation with Deuteronomic blessings, in Deuteronomy 8, is that you think my hand, my wisdom, my power has gotten me this wealth.
Yeah. And
you forget God.
Yeah. So how does someone harmonize? So let's take the proverb of a good man, a righteous man, stores up an inheritance for his grandchildren. Okay. Now, when you just do the math, if you leave an inheritance for your children's children, you had to make some pretty wise financial decisions early on in your life. And I would say probably in America, that would be the exception, right? Not most people are in debt and they don't do that. And I think there's a lot of Christians who grow up reading the New Testament, hearing Jesus say, leave everything behind, leave everything for Jesus, give everything away. How does someone harmonize that kind of a radical Christian lifestyle with something like you should store up an inheritance for your children's children?
So it's interesting. If you look at one of those radical it's in the Gospel of Mark, in the single digit, early in the Gospel of Mark, maybe chapter 7, where Jesus is doing this radical discipleship demand.
Yeah.
And he says, and if you do this, then you will receive back fields and lands. And he says, in this life.
Yeah.
So it's not just in the life to come. Mm-hmm. It's not just eternal. So it's not a stark divide between this life and the life to come. If you surrender it all in this life, you'll get rewarded in the life to come. Although that's true.
Yeah.
The Bible also teaches, and the New Testament teaches, that a man reaps what he sows.
Yeah.
Paul teaches in Corinthians that if you sow sparingly, you will reap sparingly. If you sow freely, you're going to reap freely.
Yeah.
So it's not the case. Let me back up. Years ago, I was talking to a young man who, this was probably back in the 70s, he belonged to a cult called the Children of God. Mm-hmm. And the Children of God jumped up and down on certain passages in Luke. Whoever does not give up all that he has cannot be my disciple.
Yeah.
And I was talking to this young man, and he said, "Do you own a car?" And I said, "Yes." Now, it wasn't much of a car, but we were newlyweds back in those days, and it was an old Rambler. It wasn't much of a car. But there were things about it that I appreciated. You could work on the engine. You could open the hood and climb in and stand on the ground.
Oh, wow.
And work on the engine. So
they don't make them like they used to.
Now it's wall-to-wall stuff. Anyway, so I had a car, even though it wasn't much of one. So I said, yeah, I have a car. He said, do you have a job? Yeah. Do you have a car? Yeah. And he said, well, you're not a Christian. And I said, why is that? And he quoted Luke, whoever does not give up all that he has cannot be my disciple. He said, taking that verse out of context and absolutizing it.
Yeah.
And so I reached over and tugged on his sweater. I remember it was a dark green sweater. I tugged on his sweater and he said, whose is this? And he was flat-footed, like, he didn't know what to say. And I said, it belongs to Jesus, right? And he said, yeah, that's it.
You gave him an out.
I threw him a rope. I threw him a rope. Yeah, it belongs to Jesus. And I said, and he's just loaning it to you, right? He said, yeah, he's just loaning it to you. And you're just being a steward of the sweater. Yeah, that's it. I said, well, that's how it is with the car and the job, right?
Yeah.
Every Christian has to give up everything in principle.
Yeah.
Everything's got to be surrendered. But I don't think that's a new covenant innovation. Mm-hmm. Job surrendered everything. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
Though the fig tree not blossom, and Habakkuk, be no fruit on the vine, yet I will. So I think that God's faithful ones have always been geared to worship the Lord and adore him, whether he prospers them or not.
Yeah.
So the kings, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, our God can deliver us from this fire, O king. Our God can do that. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to worship your idol.
Yeah.
And so that kind of all-in dedication is common to both testaments. And God blesses, sometimes physically in this life. Again, this is Proverbs. This is wisdom living, not geometry living. Mm-hmm. Sometimes in this life, and sometimes in this life and in the next, and sometimes just in the next.
Yeah.
So those who are martyred lose everything, but they gain everything. Mm-hmm. Those who, in Hebrews 11, you have that important passage where it says, by faith there are men who stopped the mouths of lions and conquered kingdoms, and women received their dead back to life. All these triumphs.
Yeah.
And then a tone break in the middle. Others were tortured, lived in caves. So there are the Deuteronomic blessings are general, and God does give them to his people generally, but not absolutely head for head each and every.
Yeah.
And we're called to trust him regardless.
Yeah. While we're on this, I can't help myself. Can you talk about Luke 16 and what's happening in that parable of the steward, where Jesus is going to say, you also need to make yourself friends so they can receive you into eternal habitations, and the unrighteous mammon there.
Yeah, so Jesus says the children of this world are shrewder, I think is the way I would take it.
Yeah.
The children of this world are shrewder about how the world works than Christians are, than the children of light generally are. And Jesus is saying, in this regard, on this point, Christians should take a page from the pagan's playbook.
Yeah.
Okay? And what the ungodly steward did. So Jesus is not commending the dishonesty part. Mm-hmm. He's commending that man's understanding of how the world works. Mm-hmm. You bless other people, they bless you.
Yeah.
You take care of other people, they take care of you.
Yeah.
You establish connections and relationships by means of unrighteous mammon. Mm-hmm. Now, the steward used unrighteous mammon unrighteously. Mm-hmm. Jesus is telling his followers to use unrighteous mammon righteously. Mm-hmm. So if you are generous, if you let's say you donate, giving alms like Cornelius did, or you help someone who's struggling, and you get them up on their feet, and you get them a job, and you're using unrighteous mammon to do all that, and then that person dies and goes to heaven, and then years later you die, and they receive you into eternal habitations. Mm-hmm. You have an eternal connection with these people, and that eternal connection began with your philanthropic gift.
Yeah.
You gave money to the soup kitchen that got them off the street, that got them sober, that got them employed, that got them married to a Christian, that got them bringing up a Christian family, and then all of them receive you into eternal habitations.
Yeah. And would you say, is Jesus saying that all money or mammon is unrighteous, and then it needs to be, like Paul says, sanctified by thanksgiving and prayer or something? How would you understand that little part?
So that's a great question, and this is I think this is the kind of reasoning that Proverbs instills in us.
Yeah.
Is the thing that enables us to navigate this kind of thing. There are two kinds of idols. Okay, there's the graven image over your mantelpiece that you leave baskets of fruit in front of.
Right.
And when you become a Christian, that idol has to go. Mm-hmm. So all through the Old Testament, you pull down the idols. You tear down you cut down the groves of Ashtaroth. You topple the Baals. You desecrate the place where Moloch was worshipped.
Yeah.
So idols like that must come down. But there's another kind of idol. In Colossians and Ephesians, Paul identifies greed as idolatry. Mm-hmm. So greed is idolatry. Or so if someone idolizes his bank account, or he idolizes his wife, or he idolizes his kids and their GPAs, and my kid's an honor student at he's proud. And these people are idle. These things in his life are idols. Now, when a Baal worshiper repents of idolatry, he must do what Gideon did and tear down the idol in front of his father's house. When a man repents of the idolatry of family, he doesn't go shoot his family.
Right.
Right? Or that idol, that thing that he used to idolize, is still very much a part of his life.
Yeah.
So what repentance of idolatry there looks like is radical reprioritization.
Yeah.
Okay? It's the same with money. So mammon is a god. Mm-hmm. Mammon is an idol.
Yeah.
But it is an idol that we have to use. Mm-hmm. There's no escaping it.
Yeah.
So you can tear down the Baal in front of your house and never have another bail again, and go the rest of your life without a bail, and that's simple.
Yeah.
But you can't go the rest of your life without money. And those who try with radical vow of poverty have to sponge off of other people because they need to eat.
Yeah.
So in fact, that young man I was talking to who said, you can't be a Christian because you have a job. He wanted us, we were standing out in front of a Christian bookstore, an evangelistic Christian bookstore, Crossroads bookstore, and he wanted us to give him a leather-bound Bible. We gave him a Bible and it wasn't good enough. He wanted a leather-bound Bible. So basically, if you've got this radical thing of poverty, but you're sponging off other people because the mammon is inescapable.
Yeah.
Mammon is the circulatory system of the world.
Yeah.
So what I have to do is learn how to think about it rightly, which is what Proverbs will enable me to do.
Yeah.
So I get my priorities straight. So it'd be better to have no money and lots of love than lots of money and no love. And I'm recalibrating my thinking, which is what Proverbs helps me to do. Everything goes. What Proverbs enables me to do is rearrange the shelves of my life with everything in its proper place on its proper shelf.
Yeah. Joe Rigney has 2 fantastic books on this, Things of Earth, and then his book, Strangely Bright, which is a shorter version that just came out. Probably one of the best books I read this year. And he has a great section there where talking about like the loss of a child and saying, you can't love your child too much. It's a problem when it's a substitute. And I think we think in terms of I need to diminish my love for that thing, even like the love of money, which is a dangerous thing.
Right.
But as a substitute is when, as you said, it becomes that idolatry.
Right. And the danger that people have is that they look at the things of this world and they think that they can love Jesus more by pouring paint thinner into the bucket of their earthly goods.
Yeah.
If only I didn't care about my wife as much.
Yeah.
When you don't love Jesus more by loving your wife less, you love Jesus more and then love your wife more.
Yeah.
So if you restructure your priorities, as Proverbs teaches you how to do, your wife, when she's demoted to number 2, it's Christ is number 1 and your wife is number 2. When she's number 2, she gets far better love than when she's number 1.
Yeah.
But when she's number 1, you're out of fellowship with the source of all love, which means that all the love she's going to get is whatever you can come up with, which is, depending on the day, not very good.
Yeah.
But if you're plugged into the source of eternal joy and love and laughter, if you're in fellowship with Him, then that enables you to love the things of earth far more.
Yeah.
You can enjoy beer and bacon more than you did before.
Yeah. Okay, while we're on the topic of wives and women, what does Proverbs have to say about that?
Proverbs says to stay away from the hoochie mamas. No hoochie mamas. Okay, you wanted more than that.
Although some people, that's all they need, right?
That's all they need.
Yeah.
So it's
her feet go down to hell. That's all you need to know.
And the Bible does say that when she promises you a good time all night long, she will deliver.
Yeah.
There's a way that seems right to a man. The end is death.
Yeah.
And the loose woman or the strange woman or the kinky woman will fulfill her promises short term.
Yeah.
All right. And it's quite striking that in Proverbs, in the wisdom poems in the first 9 chapters, it's basically a courtship contest between Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly.
Yeah.
Folly is a woman, and wisdom is a woman.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where, in these politically correct times, if you say that if I had to come up with the apex of folly, how do I represent folly at its zenith?
Yeah.
It'd be a woman.
Yeah.
But that's only possible because I'd say the same thing of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Wisdom is a woman.
Yeah.
So, and you're to pursue wisdom the way a wise man would court the wisest of women. Mm-hmm. And you are to avoid Dame Folly. You're to avoid the wanton the way a wise man would stay away from this woman whose husband is on a long trip, and she promises this young ox a good time, and he goes with her like an ox to the slaughter. So he's not thinking he's not thinking past this night, right? He's not a long-term thinker. He's a short-term thinker.
Yeah. What does Proverbs have to say about alcohol?
Yeah, it says that it bites like an adder.
Yeah.
Right. And it also says that your wine vats will be full. So it's part of the abundance, but it teaches us to be suspicious of wine.
Yeah.
So wine is a good metaphor for wealth. So there's a bias in it in this fallen world.
Yeah.
There's a bias in it to indulge too much.
Yeah.
And so a man becomes wealthy and he wants just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so he becomes drunken on his wealth. Or the gluttony in Proverbs is not a second helping of mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. It's the person who's orgiastic eating.
Yeah.
It's the wild party, the orgy, the wanton drunkenness, sex.
Yeah.
And food is part of that, and food becomes part of that.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that in this fallen world, because of the sinfulness of our hearts, we are always going to be tempted to indulge too much.
Yeah. I love the description of the drunk man where it's like he's on the mast of a boat and then he's like getting punched and saying, who hit me? And it's like things have not changed much in a few thousand years.
I remember very clearly when I was in the Navy, there was a guy, he was a machinist mate on my submarine, and we were in port, and he'd gone out on a bender the night before, and he staggered into the crew's mess the morning after, all bleary and worked over. And I said, "So, did you have a good time last night?" Messing with him.
Yeah.
Did you have a good time last night? And he said, "I must have. I don't have any money." Now, for all he knew, he was knocked on the head and robbed.
Yeah.
I must have. I don't have any money. And he was a character right out of the Book of Proverbs. Off. He stepped right off the masthead.
Yep. Okay. Let's close with, what does Proverbs have to say about Jesus?
So, this is a discussion / debate. I don't know that it would be, maybe there's a debate involved, but a discussion, whether Lady Wisdom in chapter 8 is a metaphorical description of the second person of the Trinity.
Yeah.
And I believe that it is. Okay, so I would come down with those who say, this is a description, because it talks about how wisdom there was the agency of God's creating the worlds.
Yeah.
So this wisdom is prior to the creation.
Yeah.
Well, without getting into that, I think that it's talking about the second person of the Trinity. Some might stumble that the language is feminine there. Like I'm saying, God has a feminine side. No, I wouldn't put it that way. God is God the Father and God the Son. The Bible speaks of this as the creation of the world is a very masculine thing, and Christ is the executive who accomplishes what the Father decides to do. But having denied that God has a masculine side and a feminine side, having denied that, I also want to say that everything in the creation answers to something in God.
Yeah.
All right, and it's not like everything male or everything masculine. So the fact that wisdom is a lady, the fact that there is this thing presented to us in Proverbs, means that is a metaphor of something within God. In God. It's not like men reflect something. It's not like men are the image of God and women aren't.
Right.
Where it says men are the image of God in 1 Corinthians and women are the image and glory of man.
Yeah.
I think that is all tied up together.
Yeah.
So I think that the just as the woman is the crown of her husband, again in Proverbs, so Lady Wisdom is the visible image of the invisible God.
Yeah, it reminds me of Colossians 1, where it says, "In Christ are hidden all the treasures
Right.
of wisdom and knowledge." And so, I agree with you on Proverbs 8. But regardless of which position you take, you are going to want to say that the only place wisdom can be found is in Christ.
Right.
We'll close with let's give us any final favorite proverb for folks.
Well, we've already touched on this, but my favorite proverb is probably 1:7.
Okay.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, because it gives me a firm place to stand before I attempt anything else.
Yeah.
So I've got in Proverbs, I've got an entire curriculum, 12 years of schooling ahead of me in the Book of Proverbs. And Proverbs 1:7 tells me where to stand in order on my first day of school.
Yeah.
This is where I stand if I want to pursue the rest of it.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's also how Ecclesiastes ends, right? What's the end of the matter? Fear God.
Fear God.
His commands. All right, well, up next we are going to be getting into the minor prophets, but until next time, keep on reading.